In this long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. The 1960 election was one of the closest in American history, and John F. Kennedy had defeated Nixon and won by the popular vote in a narrow margin, approximately 100,000 votes. The inauguration ceremony was set on Friday, January 20th, 1961. Heavy snow had blanketed the eastern portico of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., and there were thoughts of canceling the ceremony that day. However, this was overruled. And so the scene was set for one of the most historical speeches in American history. Today, I will be discussing John F. Kennedy's famous inauguration speech, with an in-depth look at his background, the backdrop of the speech, and how the speech was designed to promote the betterment of society. First, let's begin with the background information on John F. Kennedy. According to William Manchester, he was born in Brookline, Massachusetts on May 29, 1917, and was the second of 9 children. Kennedy was brought up by a family with an immense passion for physical and mental competition amongst his siblings. His father, Joseph Patrick Kennedy, had become a multi-millionaire by banking, bootlegging, shipbuilding, and the film industry. He also gained a lot of money in the stock market. His mother, Rose, was the daughter of a one-time Boston mayor. In the fall of 1941, Kennedy joined the U.S. Navy, and a couple years later found himself in the South Pacific. By 1945, his brother, Joe, had been killed in the war, who originally was going to be the first Kennedy to run for office. So naturally, the torch got passed to the younger Kennedy, who was John F. Kennedy, who at the time wanted to pursue an academic career. This brought to the rise of political career of John F. Kennedy, who would go on to serve in the House of Representatives, vice presidential running mate, and eventually the president of the United States. As we move on, I will discuss the backdrop surrounding this legendary speech. During the decade leading up to the speech delivered by John F. Kennedy, the world was in a state of turmoil. After World War II, the U.S. and the USSR were in a heightened state of turbulence for global dominance. We also become conflicted by the involvement in the Korean War and by trying to combat the spread of communism. Despite all the conflicts that had arose and settled overseas, there was another war brewing back home, and in the 1950s gave rise to the civil rights movement. With school integration and sit-in protests spreading across the South, the 50s also gave rise to the Red Scare, which was the fear of spreading of communism in the Soviet Union. And Kennedy was able to exploit this fear the American people had to win the presidential election. Furthermore, Kennedy was determined for the betterment of humanity. As stated by a paper written by UK Essays, in his speech, which was not only spoken to the American people, but to the world. It was clear that Kennedy's main goal was to unify the entire human race and make the world a better place for everyone. John F. Kennedy called upon the American people to be the difference, to make a change, and to do what is morally right. He also wanted people to revolt against greedy men, and that their generation, Kennedy's generation, was responsible to uphold and bring the most basic of human rights to all human beings across the entire world. Kennedy's amazing passion and logic used throughout his speech is mesmerizing and instills in the listener a sense of calling, a duty to do the right thing and make the world a better place. When listening to this speech, the word utopia comes to mind. This speech I think it is ultimately what Kennedy was trying to accomplish for the American people, but not just for the American people, but for all people across the entire globe. In conclusion, the world was much different in this time that JFK was inaugurated into office. Though his beliefs he laid out in his speech, he set out to not only uplift the American people, but to uplift the entire human race. Most importantly, his call to action helps show the American people that this utopia that he imagines or images is not in the hands of the government, but is in the hands of each and every citizen of the United States. I leave you today with the same provocation that he said to the American people: ask not what you can do for your country, but ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.